Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. My name is Rahul and I'm here to guide you through setting up a Spring MVC project. Setting up Spring MVC application might seem tricky, but don't worry, I'm here to make it simple. In this video, I'll show you how to configure the dispatcher servlet and ViewResolver using XML-based configuration. It's a straightforward and reliable method that's been around for years. So without further ado, let's get started. Here's how we're gonna do it step by step. First, we create a new project and add required dependencies to pom.xml file. Next, we set up web.xml file. This is where we will define the dispatcher servlet and map it to URL pattern. After that, we'll create a Spring configuration file. This is where we'll configure beans like ViewResolver and enable component scanning. Finally, we'll create a controller and view to process the request and display the output to the user. We'll skip the initial steps of creating a Maven project and setting up Tomcat in IntelliJ because I've already covered them in detail in another video on this channel. If you haven't seen it yet, be sure to check it out for a complete walkthrough on setting up Maven web application with Tomcat. I'll provide link to the video in the description. In this video, we'll focus on the configuration part. Let's start by adding dependencies in pom.xml file. Here, we have to add Spring Web MVC and Servlet API dependencies. To get the dependencies, first go to Maven repository. In the search bar, type Spring Web MVC and press enter. You'll see list of version. Click on the version you want. I'll be using latest version 6.2.1. On the version page, scroll down to Maven section. Copy the dependency snippet and paste it in your pom.xml file under the dependencies tag. Similarly, search for Servlet API. Now here's an important clarification. If you're using Spring MVC version 5 or below, you'll need to use Java X Servlet API dependency. And if you're using version 6 or above, like the one I'm using, you should use the Jakarta Servlet API dependency. I'll choose latest version 6.1.0. Copy the snippet and paste it to your Spring MVC dependency. After adding these dependencies, save the pom.xml and reload project to update the dependencies. Next, let's configure the web.xml file, which is often called as deployment descriptor. It's where we register DispatcherServlet, the brain behind the operation. So in the web.xml file, let's define DispatcherServlet. Before that, we need to update the web.xml file to match the modern servlet specification. This default configuration generated in IntelliJ is outdated and uses Servlet 2.3 specification, which is incompatible with Jakarta Servlet API. To update the file, replace the content of web.xml with the following XML schema declaration. I have the content saved in a text file. Let me copy it and paste it here. All set. Now let's create a servlet. Here we need to provide the fully qualified name of DispatcherServlet class. To get the fully qualified name, if you are using IntelliJ, double press Shift key, and if you are using Eclipse, press Ctrl Shift T to open the search window. Here, search for DispatcherServlet. Open the class file and copy package name and paste it here. Class name and then paste. We use init param tag to point to a Spring configuration file. Set the param name to context config location and param value to the path of Spring configuration file, that is web/inf/spring-config.xml. Load on startup tag ensures that a servlet is loaded as soon as the application starts. Now let's map our servlet. Okay, now DispatcherServlet will handle all the incoming requests. Let's create spring-config.xml file. This is where we'll define our beans, ViewResolver and other settings. In the web.inf, create a file spring-config.xml. In the file, first we need to specify the XML namespace and schema locations. This is essential for Spring to validate and process configuration file. You can find the XML schema details in the Spring documentation. I'll provide link to this documentation in the description. In the documentation page, search for context schema. Copy this snippet and paste it in your XML file. Now we need to set the base package in the component scan tag. Make sure to set the correct base package. This should point to the package where controller, service and repository classes reside. If the package is incorrect, Spring won't be able to detect your beans. It's time to bring everything together. Let's create a simple controller to handle HTTP request and JSP file to render the response. As you can see, there's no Java folder here. So let's start by creating a Java folder in the main directory. Now let's create a controller class. Here we'll explore three scenarios. First, returning a plain text, then returning the full path of a JSP file, and finally using ViewResolver for cleaner code. So let's create our get method to return plain text. Now our get method is ready. So let's get our application up and running with Tomcat using Smart Tomcat plugin. If you never done it before, I've created a dedicated video which I talked about earlier. Feel free to check it out for detailed steps. Once everything is set, simply click on this button to start the server and run your application. Here, DispatcherServlet has initialized successfully. Let's open this in the browser. For that, right click on this link and select your browser. This is showing from index.jsp file. It means our Tomcat and application is configured correctly. Now in the address bar, type plain text to access the plaintext URL and trigger get method. See, the plaintext response is displaying correctly. This basic example uses get mapping and response body annotation to define a simple route and sends plain text back to the browser. It's great for testing but not we want for a full MVC setup. Now let's return a JSP page instead of plain text. Now create a folder under web.inf. In this folder, create a JSP file, home.jsp. Now let's create another method in the controller to return the path of a JSP file. Here we are explicitly specifying the path to the JSP file. Now let's run our application and check the results. The root URL is showing error because we deleted the index.jsp file, which was the default file for the root path, and we haven't mapped it in the controller yet. Let's go to our home URL. See, it's correctly returning content from the JSP file. While functional, this approach can quickly become tedious as our application grows. So let's simplify the process by introducing ViewResolver. A ViewResolver in Spring MVC is a component that helps framework determine which view to render based on the view name written by the controller. Essentially, it maps logical view names to actual view files like JSP files, so we don't have to provide full path every time. Among the various types of ViewResolver, the internal resource ViewResolver is the most commonly used. It's specifically designed for the web applications that uses JSP files. It allows us to set a common prefix and suffix to our JSP paths, making the code in a controller cleaner and easier to maintain. Now let's define the internal resource ViewResolver in our Spring configuration file. Here we have to define a bean. To get the fully qualified name of ViewResolver class, search for internal resource ViewResolver. Now right click on class name and copy reference, then paste it here. We can provide properties for this bean. This tells Spring MVC that views are located in web.inf/views directory and have .jsp suffix. With the view resolver in place, we can now return only view name from controller. Here, we can now simply return home instead of the full path of the JSP file. See how much cleaner this is. Spring MVC now automatically appends the prefix and suffix to locate the JSP file. Next, let's map the root URL as well in the gate mapping. With this change, the same method now handles requests for both root and home URLs. Now let's restart our server. Refresh the home page. As you can see, the same home.jsp file is rendered without specifying the full path in the controller. Let's check our root URL as well. Perfect, the home page is loading correctly here too. Now that we have walked through the entire process, let's quickly recap how the XML-based configuration is done. First, we added Spring Web MVC and Servlet API dependencies in our pom.xml file. Next, we dive into web.xml and register the DispatcherServlet, which serves as a controller for handling incoming requests. We also point to the Spring configuration file, which contains our Spring pin definitions. In the Spring configuration file, we specify necessary Spring configurations like component scanning and ViewResolvers. Lastly, we define basic controller to handle HTTP requests and return data. We also created a simple home.jsp to render the response. The controller returns a view name, and with the help of ViewResolver, JSP file is returned to the browser. Now here's a slightly different approach. If you don't want to use init param tag, now by convention the dispatcher servlet automatically looks for a file name as servlet name -servlet.xml. Since our servlet name is dispatcher, it will load dispatcher-servlet.xml file. Let me show you. See, we are getting file not found exception because dispatcher servlet XML file is not present in the web folder. To resolve this, we just have to create a configuration file with the name dispatcher-servlet.xml. The content of XML file will be the same as our Spring configuration XML. So, as we already have this Spring configuration file, let's just rename it to DispatcherServlet. Do the refactor. All set. Now that our Spring config has renamed to DispatcherServlet, let's restart the server to check. As you can see, DispatcherServlet is initialized successfully. And let's check. See, the same home.jsp file is rendered correctly. So whether you go with init param or let the DispatcherServlet handle the configuration by convention, both approaches work seamlessly. Pick the one that suits your project style. Thanks for following along. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe for more such videos. Until next time, happy coding.